The dust rose in clouds as Barrett Cole dragged the woman through Copper Creek's main street by her hair, her screams echoing off empty storefronts while decent folk turned away. No one dared challenge the man who owned this town, until a stranger's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. What happened next would shatter the silence of fear that had gripped this Arizona settlement for too long. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Arizona sun hung merciless in a sky bleached white by heat, beating down on Copper Creek like the hammer of an angry god. It was the kind of afternoon when sensible people stayed indoors, when even the dogs sought shade beneath the wooden boardwalks, when the very air seemed to shimmer with threat. The main street lay quiet, almost deserted, dust devils dancing between the weathered buildings that lined the road like tired sentinels. But the quiet wouldn't last. Barrett Cole's voice shattered the stillness first, a roar of rage that sent a pair of ravens bursting from the roof of the general store. Then came the sound that made blood run cold, a woman's scream, high and sharp with pain and terror. She stumbled into view at the far end of the street, her dark hair tangled in Barrett Cole's meaty fist. He was dragging her like she weighed nothing, like she was no more than a sack of grain he'd decided to haul from one end of town to the other. Her feet scrambled for purchase in the dirt, her hands clawing desperately at his wrist. But Cole was a big man, 6 feet of mean muscle, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held all the warmth of a snake's. "You think you can steal from me?" Cole bellowed, giving her hair a vicious yank that snapped her head back. "You think Barrett Cole is some fool you can rob and walk away laughing?" "Please," the woman gasped, her voice breaking. I was just... Shut your lying mouth!" He backhanded her casually, the crack of his hand against her face echoing like a pistol shot. She crumpled, would have fallen if he hadn't been holding her up by her hair. Blood trickled from her split lip, bright red against her pale skin. Doors cracked open along the street. Faces appeared in windows, pale and frightened. Martha Henderson clutched her shawl tighter and pulled back from her shop door. Old Tom Brennan, who'd once been the bravest man in 3 counties, stared at his boots. Even young Billy Watts, barely 17 and full of fire, took one look at Barrett Cole and found somewhere else to be. This was Copper Creek's truth, the reality they all lived with. Barrett Cole owned this town. He owned the copper mine that gave the place its name. He owned half the buildings on this street. He owned the sheriff, who sat in his office now with the door firmly closed and the shades pulled down. And because he owned all that, he figured he owned the people too, owned their silence, owned their fear, owned their very souls. The woman tried to get her feet under her, tried to stand, but Cole jerked her forward again. She stumbled, her knee hitting the ground hard enough to tear her already ragged dress. She was maybe 25, with the kind of beauty that hard times couldn't quite erase. High cheekbones, full lips now split and bleeding, dark eyes that held defiance even through the pain. "You're all seeing this," she cried out, her voice desperate, searching the watching faces. "You're all just standing there." Cole laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "That's right, darling. They're standing there because they're smart, because they know what happens to people who cross Barrett Cole. Don't you folks?" He raised his voice, addressing the street. "Don't you all know?" Silence answered him, shameful, cowardly silence. "That's what I thought." Cole's grin was ugly with triumph. He started walking again, dragging the woman behind him. "We're going to the jail, sweetheart. We're going to let Sheriff Dawson sort this out. And by sort this out, I mean we're going to make sure everyone in this pissant town knows what happens to thieves." "I'm not a thief." The woman's protest came out half sob, half snarl. "I was working in your saloon for honest wages, and when your foreman when he put his hands on me, I defended myself. The money fell from his pocket during the fight. I was trying to give it back when you—" "Lies." Cole's face flushed dark red. He stopped abruptly and kicked her in the ribs, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to drive the air from her lungs in a painful whoosh. "Frank Miller is my best man. You expect anyone to believe he'd lay hands on a worthless saloon girl?" "He did. She couldn't finish, curling around her bruised ribs, fighting for breath. Cole lifted his foot again, taking his time, making sure everyone could see what was about to happen. "Let's see how mouthy you are with a few broken. Let the lady go." The voice came from behind them, from the direction of the livery stable. It wasn't loud, but it carried, steady and calm, with a core of iron running through it that made even Barrett Cole pause with his boots still raised. Every head turned. The woman, still on the ground, twisted to look. Cole spun around, his hand dropping automatically to the gun at his hip. A man stood in the middle of the street, maybe 30 yards away. He was tall and lean, wearing trail-dusty clothes and a battered hat pulled low against the sun. A stubble of dark beard shadowed his jaw, and when the light caught his eyes, they were the color of winter sky, cold and clear and unforgiving. His right hand rested easy on the worn grip of a Colt revolver that hung low on his hip, tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. There was something else about him, too, something in the way he stood, the way he held himself. This wasn't some drifter who'd wander on after a few days. This wasn't some saddle tramp looking to hire out his gun. This was a man who'd seen things, done things, survived things that would have broken lesser souls. Cole's eyes narrowed, calculating. "This doesn't concern you, stranger. I suggest you move along." The man didn't move along. He walked forward instead, his steps measured and deliberate, closing the distance between them with the patience of someone who'd learned that speed wasn't always the answer. As he got closer, more details emerged. The lean, hard muscle of someone who lived in the saddle, the sun-weathered skin of a man who'd spent years under open sky, the old scar that ran along his jaw, faded white, the kind you got from a knife, if you were lucky and quick. "I said this doesn't concern you," Cole's voice rose, anger masking the first hint of uncertainty. "Do you know who I am?" "No." The stranger stopped about 15 feet away, and now they could all see his face clearly, strong features, eyes that missed nothing, a mouth set in a hard line. "And I don't much care. But I heard you just kick a woman, and I saw you dragging her through the street like an animal. So now it concerns me. I own this town," Cole said, and even as the words left his mouth, they sounded weaker than they had 5 minutes ago. "I own the law here. This woman is a thief, and I'm taking her to jail. That's how civilized society works, in case you didn't know." The stranger's gaze flicked to the woman, still on the ground, her dress torn, blood on her face, bruises already forming on her arms where Cole had gripped her. Then his eyes came back to Cole, and they were colder than before. "That's not how civilized society works," he said quietly. "And you're not taking her anywhere." Cole's face went from red to purple. "The hell I'm not, boys!" He raised his voice. "Boys!" 3 men emerged from the saloon down the street. Cole's men. Thugs who wore guns and got paid to make sure Barrett Cole's will was done. They were rough-looking characters, the kind who drifted into Copper Creek looking for easy money and found it in Cole's employment. The biggest of them was a man they called Frank Miller, 6.5 feet of muscle and meanness, with dead eyes and a reputation for violence that extended from here to New Mexico. They spread out, flanking Cole, hands hovering near their weapons. 4 against 1 now, and the stranger didn't even blink. "Last chance, mister," Cole said, his confidence returning with his reinforcements. "Walk away, or we'll carry you out of this town in a box." The stranger shifted his stance slightly, his hand still resting on his gun. When he spoke, his voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I spent 5 years wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. Saw a lot of towns like this one, places where one man with money and guns decided he was the law. You know what happened to most of those men?" Cole didn't answer, but his hand tightened on his gun grip. "They're dead," the stranger continued. "Or they're in federal prison, which amounts to the same thing. Because eventually, someone comes along who doesn't give a damn about their money or their hired guns. Someone who remembers that the law, real law, not the corrupt shadow you're hiding behind, is supposed to protect people, especially people who can't protect themselves." "You talking about yourself?" Miller growled, his hand already on his pistol. "You think you're that someone?" "I'm saying that lady is getting up and walking away from here. And if any of you try to stop her, you'll find out what I am." The stranger's eyes locked on Miller. "Starting with you, big man. I can see it in your eyes. You're the killer of this bunch. You're thinking about drawing on me right now. You're wondering if you're fast enough." Miller's jaw clenched. "Maybe I am." "Then draw." The words hung in the air like a challenge from the Old Testament. "Anytime you feel ready, but understand something first. I've killed 7 men in stand-up fights. Not ambushes, not back shooting, face-to-face, quick-draw gunfights. And I'm still here. So ask yourself, do you really think you're the one who's going to be number 8? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Miller's hand hovered over his gun, his face working through calculations of pride versus survival. Finally, slowly, his hand moved away from the weapon. That's what I thought. The stranger's voice softened, but only slightly. Ma'am, can you stand? The woman nodded, still stunned by what was happening. She got her feet under her, wincing at the pain in her ribs, and stood. Her hair hung wild around her face, and her dress was torn and dusty, but she held her head high. Come here, the stranger said. Walk behind me. She did, moving quickly, her eyes never leaving Cole and his men. When she was safely behind the stranger, she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Cole's face twisted with rage and humiliation. Around them, the townspeople were watching now, really watching, no longer hiding behind their doors and windows. This was something they'd never seen, someone standing up to Barrett Cole, someone calling his bluff. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Cole hissed. You don't know who you're dealing with. I will ruin you. I will hunt you down and— My name is Eli Carson, the stranger said, cutting him off. If you want to find me, I'll be right here in Copper Creek. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't come to this town looking for a fight. I came here tracking a killer, a man who murdered a woman and her 2 children in cold blood 6 months ago. A man who I've been following across 3 territories. A man whose trail led me right to this dust bowl of a town. He paused, letting the words sink in. Now, I don't know yet if my killer is one of your men, Mr. Cole, but I'm going to find out. And while I'm here, I'm going to make damn sure that people like this lady don't get dragged through the street like dogs. You got a problem with that? You know where to find me. Otherwise, I suggest you get out of my sight before I remember all the reasons I stopped wearing a badge. For a moment, it looked like Cole might actually do something stupid. His hand trembled near his gun, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. But then he looked at Eli Carson, really looked at him, at the eyes that had seen death and dealt it out, at the casual stance of a man who'd faced down worse than 4 bullies in a nowhere town, and something in Cole's expression changed. This isn't over, he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. Not by a long shot. I expect it isn't, Eli agreed. But it's over for today. Cole turned and stalked away, his men following. Miller looked back once, his eyes promising violence, but Eli just stared at him until the big man turned and kept walking. Only when they disappeared into the saloon did Eli relax slightly. He turned to the woman, his expression softening. You hurt bad? She shook her head, though her hand pressed against her ribs. I've had worse. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Don't thank me yet, Eli said. You got somewhere safe to stay? The woman's face fell. I was staying at Cole's rooming house, working at his saloon. I don't think that's an option anymore. Eli looked around at the watching townspeople, most of whom were still staring from their windows and doorways. Anyone here willing to take in a lady who needs help? His voice carried down the street. Anyone at all? Silence. Shameful, cowardly silence. Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded, like this was exactly what he'd expected. All right then, come on. Where are we going? Hotel, if this town has one. If not, somewhere you can rest and clean up those cuts. They walked down the street together, Eli slightly ahead, his hand never far from his gun. The woman, she still hadn't told him her name, walked carefully, each step sending a spike of pain through her bruised ribs. She studied her rescuer's back, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere like something from a story. Why did you help me? She asked quietly. Eli was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was speaking from memory. Because 6 months ago, a man murdered a woman named Sarah Mitchell, killed her and her 2 babies. One was 3 years old, the other just 6 months. Shot them in cold blood over a property dispute. By the time I got there, I was too late. All I could do was bury them and promise I'd bring their killer to justice. He paused, his hand clenching into a fist. I've been tracking that killer ever since, following his trail through Texas, through New Mexico, and finally here. Every time I hear a woman scream, every time I see someone hurting someone weaker, I think about Sarah Mitchell. I think about how I was too late for her, and I promise myself I won't be too late again. The woman felt tears prick her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just tell me your name. Grace. Grace Brennan. Well, Grace Brennan, let's get you somewhere safe. Then you can tell me everything you know about Barrett Cole and his men, especially the one they call Frank Miller. Grace's eyes widened. Miller? You think he's your killer? I don't know yet, but I aim to find out. They'd reached the hotel, the Copper Creek Inn, a two-story building that had seen better days but still maintained a veneer of respectability. Eli pushed through the door, the bell above jingling. The lobby was dim and cool after the brutal heat outside, smelling of dust and furniture polish. A thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from behind the desk, his eyes widening when he saw Grace's condition. I don't want trouble, he said immediately. Neither do I. Eli pulled out a handful of coins and set them on the desk. The lady needs a room, best you have, and send up hot water for a bath and whatever medical supplies you've got. Clean bandages, at least. The clerk looked at the money, looked at Grace, looked back at the money. Finally, he nodded and took a key from the board behind him. Room 7, top floor, end of the hall. It's quiet up there. Good. And one more thing. If Barrett Cole or any of his men come asking about her, you haven't seen her. Understand? The clerk swallowed hard. Mister, Barrett Cole owns a piece of this hotel. I can't just... Eli leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let me be real clear. That woman was dragged through the street like an animal. She was beaten and kicked. She's injured and scared, and right now she needs help. So you can either be the kind of man who helps, or you can be the kind who stands by while bad things happen. Which is it going to be? The clerk's face worked through several expressions before settling on resignation. I haven't seen her, but if Cole finds out, you tell him to come talk to me, Eli Carson. I'll be easy to find. Grace took the key with trembling fingers. She started toward the stairs, then stopped and looked back at Eli. Would you? I'll be right here, Eli said gently. Get yourself cleaned up, tend to your wounds. I'll be in the lobby. Anyone wants to get to you, they'll have to go through me first. Grace nodded, something like gratitude flooding her features, and climbed the stairs. Eli watched her go, then turned back to the clerk. She needs food too. Something soft, easy to eat. Her lips split pretty bad. I'll see what I can do. The clerk paused. You really kill 7 men in gunfights? 8, actually. Just didn't want to brag about it in front of the lady. The clerk's eyes went wide, and he scurried off to see about the food and hot water. Eli walked to one of the threadbare chairs near the window and sat down, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and the stairs. His hand rested on his gun, and his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging entrances and exits, calculating angles and distances. This was what his life had become. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd wanted, but the life he'd earned through choices and circumstances and one terrible day when everything had changed. He'd been a U.S. Marshal once, a good one, with a reputation for bringing in dangerous men alive when he could, dead when he couldn't. He'd believed in the law then, believed in justice, believed that right and wrong were clear lines that a man could follow. Then he'd made the mistake of bringing in a man named Jack Holloway, brought him in alive, testified against him in court, watched him get sentenced to hang. What Eli hadn't known was that Holloway had friends, rich friends, friends who could bribe judges and buy juries, friends who could make a murder charge disappear like morning mist. Holloway had walked free after serving just 6 months, and 3 days later, he'd put a bullet in the back of Eli's wife, Emma, while she was hanging laundry in their backyard. Emma Carson had been 28 years old. She'd been beautiful and kind and patient with a husband who was gone more often than he was home. She'd deserved a long life full of children and grandchildren and peaceful days. Instead, she'd gotten a bullet in the spine and died on her back porch, staring up at the sky, while Eli was 200 miles away chasing another killer. By the time Eli got home, Emma was already buried. By the time he tracked down Jack Holloway, the man was across the Mexican border, untouchable. Eli had stood on the American side of the Rio Grande, staring across at Holloway's campfire, and made himself a promise. He'd quit the marshals. He'd never again let the law get between him and justice. And he'd spend the rest of his life making sure that what happened to Emma didn't happen to anyone else. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of drifting, of hunting down killers and stopping injustice wherever he found it. 3 years of becoming someone he barely recognized when he looked in a mirror. 3 years of wondering if Emma would be proud of what he'd become or horrified. The clerk returned with a tray of food. Some bread, some cheese, a bowl of soup. "For the lady, and—" He hesitated, then pushed the tray toward Eli. "There's enough for 2. Eli nodded his thanks and took the tray upstairs. He knocked softly on the door to room 7. "It's Eli. Got food." The door opened a crack, then wider. Grace had washed her face and attempted to tidy her hair, but the damage was still evident, the split lip, the bruises forming on her cheekbone, the way she held herself carefully to protect her ribs. "Thank you." She took the tray, then surprised him by not closing the door. "Would you, I don't want to eat alone, and I feel safer if you're nearby." Eli hesitated. It wasn't proper being in a ladies' room unchaperoned, but proper had gone out the window the moment Grace had been dragged through the street, and if his presence made her feel safe, he could endure any scandal. "Leave the door open," he said. "I'll sit here." He positioned himself in the doorway, where he could watch the hall and still be visible from the street below. "You should eat, especially the soup. Your lip's going to hurt for a few days, and soft food will be easier." Grace sat on the bed and began eating slowly, wincing when her split lip protested. For a while they were silent. Then she said, "You really were a marshal?" "For 7 years." "Why'd you quit?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "Personal reasons." Grace seemed to understand that this wasn't a topic for pressing. Instead, she asked, "This man you're tracking, the one who killed that woman and her children, what makes you think he's here?" Witnesses in New Mexico said a man matching his description passed through, headed to Arizona. Said he was talking about work in the copper mines, easy money. The trail led me here. "And you think it's Frank Miller?" "I don't know. Description fits. Big man, dark hair, dead eyes. But I need to be sure before I make my move. Can't risk being wrong." He looked at her. "You said Miller tried something with you. What happened?" Grace's face tightened. "I've been working at Cole's saloon for 3 months. It's not good work, but it pays. Miller started paying attention to me about 2 weeks ago. Nothing obvious at first, just watching, following me with his eyes. Then he started making comments. Then he started trying to corner me alone." "Did he hurt you before today?" "He tried. Caught me in the storeroom, put his hands on me. I fought back, scratched his face, kicked him where it counts. During the fight, money fell out of his pocket, a lot of money. I picked it up to give it back to him, but he started screaming that I'd stolen it, ran and got Cole before I could explain." "So Cole never heard your side?" "Cole never wanted to hear my side. Miller's his enforcer, his right-hand man. I'm just a saloon girl. Who do you think he believed?" Eli's jaw tightened. It was an old story, the kind he'd seen played out in a dozen towns across the West. Men with power protecting other men with power, while the powerless got trampled. "Tell me about Miller. Where does he come from? What do you know about his past?" "Not much. He showed up about 8 months ago, looking for work. Cole hired him on the spot, said he liked men who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Miller became Cole's problem solver. Someone doesn't pay their debts? Miller collects. Someone causes trouble? Miller handles it. There are rumors—" She trailed off. "What kind of rumors?" "That he's killed men, not in fair fights, ambushes mostly. One man they found in an alley with his throat cut. Another disappeared entirely, and there was a prospector who'd found a rich claim. He ended up dead, and somehow Cole ended up with the claim papers." "Was Miller in town 8 months ago, or did he show up later?" Grace thought about it. "Later, I think. Maybe 7 months? I wasn't here then, but I remember people talking about the new enforcer when I arrived." 7 months. Sarah Mitchell had been killed 6 months ago. The timeline fit. If Miller had committed the murders, then fled across the territories, He could have arrived in Copper Creek right on schedule. But Eli had learned the hard way not to jump to conclusions. He'd seen innocent men hanged on less evidence than this, and he'd be damned if he'd become the kind of man who killed based on suspicion and rumor. "I need to be certain," he said, more to himself than to Grace. "I need proof." "How are you going to get proof?" "By watching, waiting, asking questions. Sooner or later a man's past catches up with him. If Miller is my killer, he'll have made mistakes. People will have seen things. I just need to find those people and convince them to talk." "In this town?" Grace's laugh was bitter. "Everyone's too scared of Cole to talk. You saw how they were today, watching me get beaten and doing nothing." "Fear's a powerful thing," Eli agreed. "But it's not absolute. There's always someone willing to talk if you find the right leverage. Someone who's angry enough or brave enough or just tired enough of living in fear." Grace finished her soup and set the bowl aside. "What happens now? To me, I mean. I can't go back to the saloon. I can't work for Cole anymore. I don't have any money, and this room, I can't pay for more than a night or two." Eli pulled out his billfold and counted out money. "This should cover a week. By then, we'll figure something out." "I can't take your money." "Yes, you can. Consider it payment for information about Miller." He paused. "You got family, somewhere else you could go?" Grace shook her head. "My parents died when I was 15. I've been on my own since then, moving from town to town, taking whatever work I could find. I came here because—" She laughed bitterly. "Because I heard Copper Creek was a good town, a safe town. Shows what I know." "It could be a good town," Eli said quietly. "Towns aren't born bad. They become bad when good people stop caring, when they let fear rule their lives. But that can change. It just takes someone willing to stand up first." "You think you can change Copper Creek all by yourself?" "I don't have to do it by myself. I just have to remind people what they've forgotten, that they outnumber men like Barrett Cole, that fear only has power if you let it." Grace studied him in the lamplight. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which yet." "Probably a little of both." Eli stood. "You should rest. Lock this door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or the hotel clerk. If anyone else tries to get in, scream. I'll be downstairs in the lobby all night." "You're going to sit up all night? You must be exhausted." "I've sat up longer nights for worse reasons. I'll be fine." He tipped his hat to her. "Sleep if you can, Grace. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." He pulled the door closed and waited until he heard the lock click into place. Then he went back downstairs to his vigil. The night passed slowly. The clerk went home, leaving Eli alone in the darkened lobby. He sat in his chair by the window, watching the street, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night. Somewhere, a piano played badly. Somewhere else, men laughed in a saloon. And somewhere out there, Frank Miller was probably planning what he'd do to the stranger who'd humiliated Barrett Cole. Let him plan, Eli thought. Let them all plan. He'd faced worse than a town full of bought and paid-for thugs. Around midnight, the front door opened. Eli's hand went to his gun, but it was just an old man bent with age carrying a covered basket. "Saw what you did today," the old man said without preamble. "Saw you stand up to Cole. That took guts. Or stupidity, depending on who you ask." The old man chuckled. "Maybe both. Either way, figured you might be hungry. My wife made extra stew." He set the basket on the table beside Eli's chair. "And before you ask, no, we can't put you up. No, we can't help you openly. We got grandchildren to think about. And Cole—" "I understand," Eli said gently. "And I'm grateful for the stew. What's your name?" "Tom Brennan. Used to be sheriff here before Cole bought the current one. That girl upstairs, Grace. She's my niece. Sister's child. Came here looking for family, and all I could offer her was a job in Cole's saloon because I'm too old and too scared to—" His voice broke. Eli stood and put a hand on the old man's shoulder. "Grace is safe now, and you're doing what you can. That's all anyone can ask." "It's not enough. Should have been me standing up to Cole today, not some stranger. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere until this is finished." Eli paused. "Tom, I need to ask you something. Frank Miller. What do you know about him?" Tom's face darkened. "He's a killer, cold-blooded. I've seen him beat men half to death over the smallest things. Why?" "Because I think he might be the man I've been tracking. A man who murdered a woman and her children 6 months ago. Tom's eyes widened. God in heaven, you really think... I think it's possible, but I need proof. I need witnesses. People who've seen him do violent things. People who might know where he was 6 months ago. That's dangerous knowledge to have in this town. I know, but if I'm right, if Miller is my killer, then he can't be allowed to walk free. And if I'm wrong... Eli's jaw tightened. If I'm wrong, then I keep looking until I find the right man. But I have to know for sure. Tom was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "There's a woman, widow named Sarah Chen. She does laundry, keeps to herself. Miller beat her son pretty badly a few months back, broke the boy's arm over some imagined insult. She might talk to you, if you can convince her you're not one of Cole's men. Where can I find her?" "Little house at the edge of town, near the creek. Blue door. But be careful. Miller's probably got Cole's men watching for you." "I'll be careful." Eli extended his hand. "Thank you, Tom. For the stew, and for the information, and for raising a brave niece." Tom shook his hand, his grip surprisingly strong for such an old man. "You watch yourself, son. This town, it might not look like much, but there's good people here. People who are tired of being afraid. You keep standing up like you did today, you might be surprised how many stand up with you." After Tom left, Eli ate the stew. It was good, rich with vegetables and tender meat, and settled back into his watch. The night deepened. Stars appeared in the black sky, hard and bright and cold, and in room 7 above, Grace Brennan slept fitfully, dreaming of hair-pulling and fists, of a stranger with winter eyes who'd stepped between her and destruction. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it, the next act in a drama that was only just beginning. The Arizona dawn broke like a promise, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose. Eli watched it from his chair in the hotel lobby, his body stiff from a night of vigilance, but his mind sharp and alert. He'd learned long ago how to function on little sleep, how to keep his senses keen even when exhaustion pulled at him like a weight. It was one of the skills that had kept him alive through 7 years as a marshal and 3 years of hunting killers across the territories. The town was beginning to stir. He could hear the sound of shutters opening, the clatter of pots and pans from a kitchen somewhere nearby, the distant bray of a mule. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life. The same sounds you'd hear in any town from here to California. But Eli had learned that evil didn't announce itself with thunder and lightning. It wore the face of normalcy. It hid behind everyday sounds and familiar routines. Footsteps on the stairs made him turn. Grace descended slowly, one hand on the railing, the other pressed against her ribs. In the morning light, the damage was even more visible. The bruises on her face had darkened to purple and yellow, and she moved like every step hurt. But there was something different in her eyes this morning, something harder than fear. "You really stayed down here all night," she said. It wasn't a question. "Told you I would." "Most men's promises aren't worth the breath it takes to speak them." "Then you've known the wrong men." Eli stood, his joints protesting slightly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was dragged through the street and kicked." Grace managed a small smile despite her split lip. "But better than I have any right to feel, thanks to you." "Is that stew?" "Tom Brennan brought it last night, your uncle. There's plenty left if you're hungry." Grace's eyes widened. "Uncle Tom came here? But he told me when I first arrived that he couldn't be seen helping me, that Cole would..." She stopped, understanding dawning on her face. "You're changing things already, aren't you? Making people remember who they used to be." "I'm not doing anything except being myself. The rest is up to them." Eli gestured to the basket. "Eat. You need your strength." They shared the remaining stew in comfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of the waking town outside. When they finished, Eli said, "I need to go out today, ask some questions, see if I can learn more about Miller. I want you to stay here, door locked. The clerk will bring you meals. Don't open the door for anyone else." "What if Cole's men come?" "They won't. Cole's not stupid. He knows that if something happens to you now, it'll look like retaliation. He'll wait, bide his time, try to catch me when I'm alone." Eli checked his gun, a habit so ingrained he barely noticed he was doing it. "But just in case, I'll talk to the clerk. Make sure he knows to get the real sheriff if there's trouble." Grace laughed bitterly. The real sheriff? You mean Sheriff Dawson, who's been in Cole's pocket since the day he pinned on that badge? Even bought men have limits. Push them hard enough, remind them of the oath they took, and sometimes they remember there's more at stake than money. Eli put on his hat. I'll be back before dark. You need anything, tell the clerk. He started for the door, then stopped when Grace called his name. Eli. She stood, holding herself carefully. Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's just about finding your killer. You could ask your questions and move on without involving yourself in this town's problems. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his hand on the doorframe. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was speaking from someplace deep inside himself. 3 years ago, I was a U.S. Marshal. Had a wife named Emma. She was, his voice caught, just slightly. She was everything good in the world, patient and kind and strong in ways I never was. I was gone a lot, chasing outlaws, serving warrants. She never complained, just kissed me goodbye and told me to be careful. He turned slightly, though he didn't quite look at Grace. I put a man named Jack Holloway in jail. Murder charge. I testified against him, watched him get sentenced to hang. But Holloway had money, had connections. He bought his way out in 6 months, and 3 days after he walked free, he put a bullet in Emma's back while she was hanging laundry, killed her because he couldn't get to me. Grace's hand went to her mouth. Oh God, Eli, I quit the marshals the day after her funeral, swore I'd never let the law get between me and justice again. Swore I'd spend whatever life I had left making sure that what happened to Emma didn't happen to other people. So when I see a woman being dragged through the street, when I see people too scared to help, I don't have a choice. I have to act, because if I don't, then Emma died for nothing, and I've become exactly the kind of man who stands by while evil happens. The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Grace crossed the room and took Eli's hand in both of hers. She'd be proud of you, Grace said softly. You're Emma. I didn't know her, but I know she'd be proud. Eli nodded, not trusting his voice. Then he gently pulled his hand free and walked out into the morning sun. The town looked different in daylight, less threatening but no less weary. Copper Creek was like 100 other mining towns Eli had seen, built quickly to service the mine, thrown together with more hope than planning. The buildings leaned slightly, as if tired from holding themselves upright. The streets were rutted and dusty. Everything had a temporary feel to it, as if the whole town knew that when the copper ran out, it would blow away like tumbleweeds. Eli walked slowly, taking in details. The general store with its faded sign, the saloon where Grace had worked, its windows dark now in the early morning, the sheriff's office with its peeling paint and closed door, and everywhere people who wouldn't quite meet his eyes, who turned away when he looked at them, who carried their shame like visible weights. He found the house with the blue door where Tom Brennan had said the widow Sarah Chen lived. It was at the edge of town, near a struggling creek that probably dried up completely in summer. The house was small but well-maintained, with curtains in the windows and a tiny garden struggling in the alkaline soil. Eli knocked gently, aware that he probably looked threatening. A tall stranger with a gun on his hip and days of trail dust on his clothes. The door opened a crack and a woman's face appeared. She was Chinese, maybe 40 years old, with threads of gray in her black hair and eyes that had seen too much hardship. Mrs. Chen? My name is Eli Carson. Tom Brennan sent me. I was hoping I could talk to you for a few minutes. The door didn't open any wider. I don't talk about Mr. Cole's business. I don't make trouble. I'm not here to make trouble for you, ma'am. I just need information about one of Cole's men, Frank Miller. At Miller's name, something flickered in Sarah Chen's eyes, fear mixed with old anger. Go away. I can't help you. Ma'am, please. I'm not working for Cole. I'm hunting a killer, a man who murdered a woman and her children. I think Miller might be that man, but I need to be certain before I act. Tom said Miller hurt your son. I need to know what happened. You're the one who helped that girl yesterday. It wasn't a question. People are talking about it, saying you stood up to Mr. Cole. I did what anyone should have done. Sarah Chen studied him through the crack in the door, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she opened the door wider. Come in, but quickly, before anyone sees. The interior of the house was simple but immaculate, everything in its place. A young man sat at a small table, his left arm in a crude splint. He looked up when Eli entered, his eyes widening with recognition. "This is my son, David," Sarah said. "David, this is the man from yesterday." David stood awkwardly, favoring his injured arm. "You really made Barrett Cole back down. I didn't think anyone could do that." "Cole backed down because he's a bully, and bullies are cowards at heart." Eli turned to Sarah. "I'm sorry about your son's arm. Tom said Miller did that?" Sarah's face hardened. 3 months ago. David was working at the stable, tending the horses. Miller came in drunk, angry about something. He started yelling at David, calling him names I won't repeat. David is a good boy. He just tried to do his work, tried to stay out of Miller's way, but that wasn't enough. "He grabbed me," David said quietly, his good hand clenching into a fist. "Threw me against the wall. Started hitting me. I tried to defend myself, but he's so big and I—" His voice broke. "He broke my arm. Just grabbed it and snapped it like a twig. Said it was to teach me respect." "And the sheriff?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. "Sheriff Dawson said it was my word against Miller's," Sarah said bitterly. "Said boys get into fights sometimes, and maybe I should teach my son to be more careful around his betters." "His betters." Her voice rose slightly before she controlled it. "Miller is a monster, and everyone knows it, but no one will say it out loud because they're all terrified." Eli crouched down so he was eye level with David. "I need you to think carefully, David. This is important. Before Miller hurt you, did he say anything about his past? Anything about where he'd been or what he'd done?" David thought about it, his brow furrowing. He was drunk and rambling, said something about how he'd dealt with bigger problems than a stable boy. Said he'd handled people before and no one ever found out. He laughed about it, like it was funny. Handled them how? He didn't say exactly, but the way he said it, David shivered. It sounded like he meant he'd killed them. Sarah put a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "Mr. Carson, I need to know if you're going after Miller, if you're planning to bring him to justice. Will my son be safe? Will any of us be safe? Because if Miller finds out we talked to you, I won't let that happen," Eli said firmly. "And I'm not just going after Miller. I'm going after the whole corrupt system that lets men like him hurt people like your son. But I need more information. I need to know where Miller was 6 months ago, who he's worked with, what other violence he's been involved in." "There's a man," Sarah said slowly. "A prospector named Henry Walsh. He used to drink with Miller sometimes at the saloon. I heard them talking once when I was delivering laundry. Miller was drunk, bragging about his past. Walsh might know more. Where can I find Walsh?" "He has a claim about 5 miles north of town. But, Mr. Carson—" She hesitated. "Walsh is afraid. Everyone in this town is afraid. He might not talk to you." "Let me worry about that. You and David just stay safe. Lock your doors, and if Miller comes around, you send for me at the hotel. Understand?" Sarah nodded, though doubt clouded her eyes. As Eli turned to leave, David called out, "Mr. Carson, are you really going to change things? Make Copper Creek safe again?" Eli looked back at the young man with the broken arm, at his mother with her fear-worn face, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over his shoulders. "I'm going to try, son. That's all any of us can do. Try our best and hope it's enough." He left the Chen house and made his way back toward the center of town, his mind working through what he'd learned. Miller was violent, that much was certain. He'd bragged about handling people in the past. The timeline was right, but it still wasn't proof. Not the kind of proof Eli needed before he could act with certainty. As he walked past the general store, a woman stepped out onto the boardwalk. Martha Henderson, the same woman who'd pulled back from her door yesterday when Grace was being dragged through the street. She looked at Eli, her face working through some internal struggle, then quickly stepped back inside and closed the door. But as the door was closing, Eli heard her whisper, "Thank you." It wasn't much. 2 words, barely audible. But it was something, a crack in the wall of fear that Barrett Cole had built around this town. Eli continued down the street, aware of eyes watching him from windows and doorways. He was passing the saloon when the doors swung open and Frank Miller stepped out. In full daylight, Miller was even more imposing than he'd been yesterday. 6.5 feet tall, broad as a barn door, with hands like hams and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes were flat and dead, the eyes of a man who'd learned to feel nothing when he hurt people. 3 scratches marked his left cheek, fresh enough to still be scabbed over. From Grace's fingernails, Eli realized. Miller stopped when he saw Eli, his hand dropping automatically to the gun at his hip. For a moment, they stood there in the street, 2 men taking each other's measure. "You're still here," Miller said. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, which somehow made him more menacing. "Thought maybe you'd have the sense to ride out while you still could." "I told Cole yesterday, I'm not going anywhere, not until I find what I came for." "And what did you come for exactly?" Miller took a step forward. "You said something yesterday about tracking a killer. That's supposed to be me?" Eli kept his hand relaxed, ready to draw, but not threatening. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I don't like being accused of things I didn't do." Another step. "And I really don't like strangers who stick their noses into other people's business." "Funny thing about that," Eli said conversationally. "The man I'm tracking, the one who killed Sarah Mitchell and her children, he doesn't like accusations either. Got real angry when someone suggested he was involved in a land dispute. So angry he shot a woman in front of her babies, then shot the babies too. Youngest was 6 months old. Took 3 bullets to make sure she was dead." Miller's face didn't change, but something flickered in those dead eyes. "Sounds like a monster." "He is, but here's what I've learned about monsters. They're never as smart as they think they are. They always make mistakes, leave traces. And sooner or later, someone like me comes along and pieces it all together." Eli paused. "Where were you 6 months ago, Miller? Why should I tell you?" "Because if you've got nothing to hide, it's an easy way to get me off your back. If you were here in Copper Creek 6 months ago, working for Cole, then you couldn't have been in Texas shooting a woman and her children. Simple as that." Miller was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on something. "I don't have to answer your questions. I don't have to tell you a damn thing." "That's true. But an innocent man usually doesn't mind accounting for his whereabouts. A guilty man, on the other hand, he gets real defensive real quick." "You calling me guilty?" "I'm calling you defensive." Eli smiled slightly. "Which makes me curious about what you're defensive about." Miller's hand twitched toward his gun, then stopped. Around them, people were watching from windows and doorways, drawn by the confrontation. Miller seemed to realize that drawing on an unarmed man, or a man who wasn't clearly threatening him, would look bad, even in a town as corrupt as Copper Creek. "This isn't over," Miller said finally. "You keep pushing, keep asking questions, and you're going to find trouble. More trouble than you can handle." "I've handled trouble before. I'm still here." Miller stared at him for another moment, then turned and walked back into the saloon. But Eli could feel the violence radiating off the man like heat from a forge. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Eli spent the rest of the morning carefully navigating the town, talking to people who would talk to him and observing those who wouldn't. The pattern was always the same. People wanted to help. You could see it in their eyes, but fear held them back. Fear of Barrett Cole, fear of losing their livelihoods, fear of what Miller might do if they spoke out. By noon, the heat was oppressive, and Eli returned to the hotel to check on Grace and get out of the sun. He found her in the lobby, talking quietly with the clerk. She looked better, less shaky, more color in her face, though the bruises were still vivid. "You shouldn't be down here," Eli said gently. "What if Cole's men come by? I was going stir-crazy up there. And besides," she gestured to the clerk, "Mr. Patterson was telling me about a room in the back. Used to be storage, but it has a window and a door that locks from inside. I could stay there instead, be less visible." Patterson, the clerk, nodded nervously. "It's not much, but it's safer than the upstairs room. Street-facing rooms are too exposed." Eli studied the man. Yesterday, Patterson had been reluctant to even acknowledge Grace's presence. Today, he was offering her a hiding place. Another crack in the wall. "That's kind of you, Mr. Patterson. What changed your mind?" Patterson flushed. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about what kind of man I want to be. My father, he was a good man, stood up for what was right, even when it cost him. I've been dishonoring his memory, standing by while people get hurt. I can't..." He stopped, swallowed hard. I can't keep living like this. So it's not much, but it's what I can do. It's more than not much, Eli said quietly. It's everything. Thank you. They moved Grace's few belongings to the back room, which was indeed small and sparse, but had the advantage of being hidden from the street. Once she was settled, Eli told her about his morning, the visit to Sarah Chen, the confrontation with Miller. You need to be careful, Grace said, her face worried. Miller's not just mean, he's crazy. I've seen the way he looks at people, like they're not even human, like they're just things he can break if he wants to. I know, but if he's my killer, I can't let him walk free. I can't. Eli stopped, the old pain rising up. I can't be too late again. Grace reached out and took his hand. You weren't too late yesterday. You saved me. And you're giving this whole town hope just by being here, by showing them that it's possible to stand up. That's not nothing, Eli. Before Eli could respond, Patterson appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Mr. Carson, there's someone here to see you, says it's important. Eli's hand went to his gun. Who? Sheriff Dawson. Eli and Grace exchanged a look. Then Eli said, Send him back. Let's hear what the law has to say. Sheriff Dawson was a soft-looking man in his 50s, with a paunch and thinning hair and eyes that couldn't quite meet yours directly. He wore his badge like it embarrassed him, and when he walked into the back room, he took off his hat and twisted it in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. Mr. Carson, Miss Brennan. He nodded to each of them. I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday. Are you here to arrest me for standing up to Barrett Cole? Eli asked mildly. Or to arrest Grace for defending herself against assault? Dawson flushed. No, nothing like that. Look, I know what people think of me. I know they think I'm in Cole's pocket, and maybe they're right. But I want you to know something. I was a real lawman once. I wore this badge with pride, served this town honorably. That was before Cole bought up half the county, before he made it clear that sheriffs who didn't cooperate tended to have unfortunate accidents. So you're here to threaten me? Eli's voice was cold. Tell me to back off or suffer the consequences. No, God, no. Dawson sat down heavily, still twisting his hat. I'm here to tell you that you're right. About Cole, about Miller, about all of it. This town is sick with corruption, and I've been too scared and too weak to do anything about it. But watching you yesterday, seeing you stand up when no one else would, he stopped, his voice thick with emotion. It reminded me of who I used to be, who I should still be. Grace leaned forward. Then help us. Tell us what you know about Miller. Dawson was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with something internal. Finally, he said, Miller came to Copper Creek 7 months ago. Cole hired him on the spot, no questions asked. I thought it was suspicious, so I sent a telegram to a friend of mine who's a sheriff up in New Mexico. Asked if he knew anything about a man matching Miller's description. And? Eli's pulse quickened. My friend said there'd been trouble in a town called Red River about 8 months back. A big man, dark hair, dead eyes, matches Miller perfectly. Got into it with a local rancher over a land deal. Things got heated. A week later, the rancher's wife and kids turned up dead, shot in their own home. The rancher came home from town to find them. Eli's hands clenched into fists. Did they catch the killer? No, he vanished, but everyone knew who'd done it, the man from the land dispute. Problem was, no one could prove it, and by the time the law started looking, he was long gone. Dawson met Eli's eyes for the first time. The rancher's name was David Mitchell. His wife was Sarah. The world seemed to tilt slightly. After 6 months of tracking, of following cold trails and dead ends, Eli was finally looking at proof. Not courtroom proof, not the kind that would satisfy a judge, but enough, more than enough. Why didn't you tell anyone? Grace demanded. Why didn't you arrest Miller? With what evidence? A telegram from another sheriff saying a man matching Miller's description was suspected of murder? Cole would have laughed me out of town, and then I'd have ended up in an alley with my throat cut, and nothing would have changed. Dawson's shame was palpable. I'm not proud of my cowardice, Miss Brennan, but I've got a wife and daughters. I had to think of them. So you let a child killer walk free to protect your own family? Eli said quietly. His voice held no judgment, just statement of fact, which somehow made it worse. Yes, God forgive me, yes. Dawson looked up, his eyes red. But I'm here now. I'm ready to help, if you'll have me. I'm ready to be the lawman I swore to be. Eli studied the sheriff, seeing past the soft body and weak eyes to something harder underneath. The ghost of the man Dawson had once been, the man he might become again, if given the chance. All right, Eli said finally. Here's what we're going to do. He laid out his plan, speaking quietly but firmly. They would need evidence, real evidence, not just suspicions and rumors. They would need witnesses willing to testify. They would need to break Cole's hold on the town, which meant showing people that it was possible to stand up without getting killed. It was a tall order, maybe an impossible one, but it was all they had. Dawson listened, nodding occasionally, his expression growing firmer as Eli spoke. When Eli finished, the sheriff stood and put his hat back on, settling it with a gesture that held more authority than he'd shown since entering the room. I'll do what I can, Dawson said. But Mr. Carson, Eli, you need to understand something. Cole has men everywhere. Even if we build a case against Miller, even if we can prove he killed those people, Cole will fight us every step of the way. He'll use his money, his influence, his hired guns. It won't be easy. I never expected easy, Eli replied. I just expected right. After Dawson left, Grace turned to Eli. Do you trust him? I trust that he wants to be better than he has been. Whether that's enough? Eli shrugged. We'll find out. The afternoon passed slowly. Eli made arrangements with Patterson to have meals brought to Grace, then set out to find Henry Walsh, the prospector Sarah Chen had mentioned. The 5-mile ride north took him through increasingly rugged terrain, the copper mine visible in the distance like a wound in the earth. He found Walsh's claim without too much trouble, a modest operation with a small sluice box and a tent that had seen better days. Walsh himself was a weathered man in his 60s, all bone and sinew, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent his life in harsh sun. You're that stranger, Walsh said when Eli rode up. The one who faced down Cole. News travels fast. In a town like Copper Creek, news is all we got. Walsh studied Eli with shrewd eyes. You here to ask about Miller, I'm guessing. Everyone says you're hunting a killer. Everyone says right. Will you talk to me? Walsh was quiet for a moment, then gestured to a log near his fire. Sit. Want coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot. Easy. They sat and drank truly terrible coffee while Walsh gathered his thoughts. Finally, the old prospector said, I knew Miller was bad news the moment I met him. Some men, you can just tell. They got darkness in them that leaks out, no matter how they try to hide it. Did he ever talk about his past? One night, about 5 months back, we were drinking at the saloon. Miller got real drunk. Not sloppy drunk, but mean drunk. Started talking about how people didn't respect him, didn't understand what he was capable of. Said he'd done things that would make strong men weep, and nobody ever gave him credit for it. Did he say what things? Walsh's face darkened. He talked about a woman. Said she disrespected him, her and her man both. Said they'd tried to cheat him out of money, out of land. Said he'd made them pay in a way they'd never forget. The old man's voice dropped. But here's the thing that stuck with me. He said they'd never forget, but then he laughed and said, except they can't forget because they're dead. Laughed about it like it was funny. Eli's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Did he mention children? Walsh nodded slowly. Said something about cleaning up loose ends. Said you couldn't leave witnesses no matter how young. His voice broke slightly. I didn't want to believe he meant what I thought he meant. But the way he said it, the look in his eyes, Walsh looked up at Eli. He killed children, didn't he? You're Sarah Mitchell's children. Yes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on them. Then Walsh said, What are you going to do? What I came here to do, bring him to justice. There's no justice in Copper Creek. Cole owns the law. Not anymore. Sheriff Dawson is coming around, and even if he wasn't, Eli's eyes went cold. I didn't come this far to let a child killer walk free. One way or another, Miller will answer for what he did. You planning to kill him? I'm planning to give him a choice, Come peacefully and face a trial, or draw on me and face judgment right there in the street. Either way, Sarah Mitchell and her children get justice. Walsh studied him for a long moment. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the craziest. Maybe both. Eli stood. Will you testify to what you just told me? If it comes to a trial? Walsh was quiet, fear and conscience warring on his weathered face. Finally, he nodded. Yeah, I will. I'm too old to keep living scared. And those children, they deserve someone to speak up for them. Thank you. Eli shook the old man's hand. When this is over, when Copper Creek is free of men like Cole and Miller, you'll be able to say you helped make it happen. He rode back to town as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of fire. The temperature was dropping as it always did in the desert, the brutal heat giving way to cool evening air. But Eli barely noticed. His mind was working through the pieces of the puzzle, fitting them together into a picture that was becoming clearer by the hour. Miller was his killer. The timeline matched. The description matched. The boasting to Walsh matched. Miller had killed Sarah Mitchell and her children, then fled across 3 territories to end up in Copper Creek, where Barrett Cole had given him protection and employment in exchange for being an enforcer. But knowing it and proving it in a way that would satisfy the law were 2 different things. And Eli had learned the hard way that acting without sufficient proof could backfire, could let guilty men walk free on technicalities. He needed more. He needed something undeniable. When he returned to the hotel, he found Grace and Patterson in the back room, talking quietly. They looked up when he entered, and Grace immediately knew something had changed. You found proof, she said. I can see it on your face. Eli told them about Walsh, about Miller's drunken confession. As he spoke, Grace's face went pale. He bragged about killing children, she whispered. What kind of monster? The kind that can't be allowed to walk free. Eli sat down heavily, suddenly feeling every mile he'd ridden, every sleepless night, every burden he carried. I've got enough to act on now. Tomorrow, I'm confronting Miller. I'm giving him a chance to surrender peacefully. And if he doesn't, you'll kill him, Grace finished, right there in the street. If he draws on me, yes, but I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping that once he knows I have witnesses, once he knows the truth is coming out, he'll see that running or fighting are his only options. And men like Miller, they always choose to fight. Then you'll be facing him in a gunfight, Grace said, her voice tight with worry. And you said yourself he's a killer. So am I. The words came out harder than Eli intended. I've killed 8 men, Grace. I didn't want to, didn't take pleasure in it, but I did it because it was necessary. And I'll kill Miller too if that's what justice requires. Patterson spoke up, his voice hesitant. Mr. Carson, what if Cole backs Miller up? What if it's not just 1 man you're facing, but 4 or 5? Then I'll face 4 or 5. Eli met their eyes. I know what you're thinking, that I'm being reckless, maybe suicidal. But I've thought this through. I've been planning this for 6 months, and I've made my peace with however it ends as long as Miller doesn't walk away. There has to be another way, Grace insisted. Some way that doesn't involve you dying in the street. If you think of one, I'm listening. But I've chased this man across 3 territories. I've followed every lead, talked to every witness, pieced together every scrap of evidence. And it all leads here, to this town, to tomorrow. I can't, his voice roughened. I can't look David Mitchell in the eye and tell him I found his family's killer, but let him go because I was too scared to act. I can't live with that. The room fell silent. Outside, the town was settling in for the night. The same sounds Eli had heard the night before, ordinary and peaceful and deceptive. How many other towns were like this, he wondered? How many other places where evil hid behind normal faces and ordinary routines? How many other Barrett Coles and Frank Millers were out there, hurting people who had no one to protect them? Too many. Far too many. And one man couldn't stop them all. But he could stop this one. Grace moved to sit beside him, her hand finding his. I know I can't change your mind. And maybe I shouldn't try. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is what justice looks like. But Eli, she squeezed his hand. Don't throw your life away. Don't make me watch another good man die because evil men won't back down. I won't throw it away. I'll fight as hard as I can to survive, but if it comes down to my life or letting Miller walk free, he met her eyes. I already made that choice 6 months ago when I started this hunt. They sat together as darkness fell over Copper Creek. 3 people bound together by circumstance and choice and the thin hope that tomorrow might bring something better than today. And somewhere across town, in Barrett Cole's saloon, Frank Miller sat drinking whiskey and cleaning his gun, unaware that his past had finally caught up with him, unaware that justice was coming with winter eyes and an iron will. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning. Tomorrow would bring the storm. And when the dust settled, Copper Creek would either be free or remain forever in chains. But tonight, for just a few hours more, there was peace. Fragile and temporary, but peace nonetheless. Eli woke before dawn, his body trained by years of hard living to sense the approach of day, even in darkness. He'd spent the night in a chair outside Grace's door again, his gun across his lap, listening to the sounds of the sleeping town. Give him the chance to surrender, and if Miller refused, well, then justice would be served in the oldest way men knew. The thought should have made him nervous, should have sent adrenaline coursing through his veins, but Eli felt only a cold calm. He'd been moving toward this moment for 6 months, and now that it was here, there was almost a sense of relief. Grace emerged from her room as he was checking his gun, making sure each chamber was loaded, that the action moved smoothly. She looked like she hadn't slept much, her eyes shadowed and worried. "You're really going through with this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "When?" "Soon. I want to talk to Dawson first, make sure he's ready to back whatever happens. Then I'll find Miller and give him his choice." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, though the morning wasn't cold. "What if Cole has men watching? What if they ambush you before you even get to Miller? Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I don't think Cole will do that. Not yet. He's a businessman first, and he knows that having his men gun down someone in broad daylight would turn even the most frightened townspeople against him. No, he'll let this play out between me and Miller. If Miller wins, Cole wins. And if I win," Eli's jaw tightened, "then Cole loses his enforcer, and this town starts to see that he's not untouchable." Patterson appeared in the doorway, looking nervous. "Mr. Carson, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Eli's hand went to his gun. "Who?" "Tom Brennan, and he's not alone. He's got Martha Henderson and old Doc Sawyer with him. They're in the lobby." Eli exchanged a glance with Grace, then followed Patterson to the front of the hotel. Tom Brennan stood there with 2 other people, Martha Henderson, the woman from the general store, and a white-haired man who had to be Doc Sawyer. All 3 looked nervous, like they were about to do something that terrified them. "Mr. Carson," Tom said, his voice low, "we need to talk to you before you do whatever you're planning to do today." "All right, talk." Martha Henderson stepped forward, her hands twisting in her apron. "We know what you're planning. The whole town knows. Word spreads fast in a place this small, and we want you to know that you're not alone. We're tired of living in fear. We're tired of watching good people get hurt while we hide behind our doors." "We want to help," Doc Sawyer added. His voice was stronger than his aged frame suggested. "I've been a doctor in this town for 30 years. I've patched up the people Miller has beaten. I've treated the injuries Cole's men have inflicted. I've kept silent because I was afraid, but I'm not keeping silent anymore." Eli looked at the 3 of them, seeing the fear still present in their eyes, but also something else, a determination that fear hadn't quite crushed. "What exactly are you offering?" "Testimony," Tom said. "Witnesses. If you can bring Miller to justice, if you can force a real trial, we'll testify to his crimes. All of us. And we'll find others who'll do the same. We'll show that this town isn't as controlled by Barrett Cole as he thinks. That's dangerous. Cole will retaliate." "Let him try," Martha said, and there was steel in her voice. "My husband died in Cole's mine 3 years ago. Accident," they said, but everyone knew the safety measures weren't being followed because Cole wanted to save money. "I've been silent for 3 years, but I'm done. If you're brave enough to stand up to these men, then so am I." Eli felt something shift in his chest, a weight he'd been carrying alone starting to distribute across other shoulders. "I appreciate this more than you know, but I need you to understand what you're risking. If things go wrong today, if Miller kills me, Cole will come after anyone who supported me. You need to be ready for that." "We're ready," Doc Sawyer said firmly, "or as ready as we'll ever be. Sometimes you reach a point where living in fear is worse than the thing you're afraid of. This town reached that point a long time ago. We just needed someone to remind us." After they left, Eli found Grace watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "You're changing this town," she said softly. "Just by being here, by showing people what courage looks like, you're changing everything. Those 3 people, yesterday, they wouldn't have dared speak out. Today, they're ready to testify in court. That's not nothing, Eli. It won't mean anything if I don't survive today." "Then survive." Grace crossed the room and took both his hands in hers. "I know you think you're ready to die for this cause, ready to trade your life for Miller's. But that's not courage, Eli. That's grief. You're still mourning Emma, still punishing yourself for not being there to save her. But she wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you throwing your life away." Eli pulled his hands free, gentle but firm. "This isn't about Emma. It's about Sarah Mitchell and her children. It's about making sure their deaths meant something." "It's about both," Grace insisted, "and I understand that I do. But promise me something. Promise me you'll fight to live today, not just to win. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks." Eli looked at her for a long moment, seeing the concern in her eyes, the fear for him, and something else he wasn't quite ready to name. Finally, he nodded. "I promise. I'll do everything I can to walk away from this." He left the hotel as the sun was climbing higher, the morning heat already building. The town was waking up around him, shopkeepers opening their stores, workers heading to the mine, children playing in the dusty streets. Ordinary life continuing as it always had, as if today was just another day and not the day everything might change. The sheriff's office was at the far end of the main street, a small building with barred windows and a sign that hung crooked. Eli pushed through the door and found Sheriff Dawson sitting at his desk, a cup of coffee in one hand and a telegram in the other. The sheriff looked up, and there was something different in his face this morning, a kind of resolve that hadn't been there before. "I was hoping you'd come by," Dawson said. He held up the telegram. "Got a response from the U.S. Marshal's office in Santa Fe. Sent them everything I knew about Miller, asked if there were any outstanding warrants. And there are. Multiple warrants across 3 territories for murder, assault, theft. Federal warrants too, which means I have legal authority to arrest him regardless of what Barrett Cole says." Dawson set down the telegram and stood up. "I'm done being Cole's puppet, Carson. I'm ready to be the law again. You understand what that means? Cole will fight you on this. He'll try to intimidate you, maybe worse. I know, but I've got something now I didn't have before. I've got you. And I've got a town full of people who are starting to remember what it means to stand up for what's right." Dawson strapped on his gun belt, checking the weapon with practiced ease. "How do you want to do this?" Eli thought about it. "We find Miller, we show him the warrants, we give him the option to surrender peacefully. If he comes along quietly, we lock him up and wait for the federal marshals to arrive. If he doesn't, then we do what we have to do," Dawson finished. His voice was steady. "I'm with you, Carson. Whatever happens." They walked out together into the morning sun, 2 men preparing to confront evil in a town that had forgotten how to fight back. As they moved down the main street, people started to notice. Doors opened, heads turned, word spread in whispers that grew louder with each block, the stranger and the sheriff walking together, armed and purposeful. Something was about to happen. They found Miller at the saloon, as Eli had expected. Even this early, the man was drinking, sitting at a table with 2 of Cole's other hired guns. Miller looked up when Eli and Dawson entered, and something like anticipation crossed his face. "Well, well," Miller said, his voice that same soft, menacing tone. "The Crusader brought the lapdog. How touching." "Frank Miller," Dawson said, and his voice carried the weight of authority it should always have had. "I'm arresting you on federal warrants for murder in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona territories. You're going to stand up, put your hands up, and come with me peacefully." Miller laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. "Federal warrants? That's what you've got? Some papers from lawmen who couldn't catch me when I was in their territories?" "Where were you 6 months ago, Miller?" Eli asked, his voice cold. Where were you when Sarah Mitchell and her 2 children were shot in their home outside Red River? For the first time, something flickered in Miller's dead eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You were there. You killed them over a land dispute with David Mitchell. Shot Sarah while she was holding her baby. Shot the baby while it was still in her arms. Then you shot the 3-year-old when he tried to run. Eli's voice never rose, but each word hit like a hammer. I've got witnesses who heard you brag about it. I've got testimony from people who saw you leave town right after. And I've got 6 months of tracking your trail across 3 territories, following the path of violence you left behind. The saloon had gone completely silent. The 2 men with Miller had backed away slightly, suddenly unwilling to be associated with a child killer. Even hardened criminals had lines they wouldn't cross, and murdering babies was one of them. Miller's face had gone pale, then red. Those are lies. All lies. That woman, she and her husband tried to cheat me. I defended myself. Against a woman and 2 babies? Dawson's voice was heavy with disgust. You're done, Miller. Stand up and come peacefully, or we'll take you by force. Miller's hand dropped toward his gun. You really think you can take me, either of you? I know I can, Eli said. I've taken 8 men in stand-up fights. You'll just be number 9. But you've got a choice here, Miller. You can surrender, face trial, maybe even convince a jury you're innocent. Or you can draw on us, and you'll be dead before you clear leather. Which is it going to be? The moment stretched out, taut as a wire. Miller's hand hovered over his gun, his face working through calculations. The saloon held its breath. Outside, the town waited. Then Miller lunged to his feet, his hand going for his gun. Eli was faster. He'd known Miller would draw. Men like Miller always drew, and he'd been ready. His Colt cleared leather in a smooth motion born of practice and survival, the hammer cocking as the barrel came up. Miller's gun was barely out of its holster when Eli fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. Miller staggered back, his hand going to his shoulder where Eli's bullet had struck him. His gun clattered to the floor. That was your warning shot, Eli said, his gun still leveled. The next one goes through your heart. Your choice. Miller dropped to his knees, his face twisted with pain and rage. You shot me. You actually shot me. You drew first. Everyone here saw it. Eli glanced at the other men in the saloon, who were all nodding. Sheriff, if you do the honors. Dawson moved forward and cuffed Miller's hands behind his back, the chain clicking with a finality that seemed to echo through the room. Frank Miller, you're under arrest for murder. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Dawson was finishing the arrest, the saloon doors burst open and Barrett Cole strode in, his face purple with rage. What the hell is going on here? Sheriff, you let that man go right now. No, Dawson said simply. Miller's under federal arrest for murder. Multiple murders, including children. The federal marshals will be here within a week to transport him to Santa Fe for trial. I don't care about federal marshals. I own you, Dawson. I own this whole damn town. You'll do what I tell you, or what? Dawson's voice was steady. You'll have me killed. Go ahead and try. But understand something, Cole. I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done letting you corrupt the law I swore to uphold, and I'm not alone anymore. As if summoned by his words, people began filling the saloon doorway. Tom Brennan, Martha Henderson, Doc Sawyer, Sarah Chen, David with his broken arm, Henry Walsh down from his claim, Patterson from the hotel. And behind them, more townspeople, dozens of them, all standing together, all silent but present. Cole looked at them, looked at the sea of faces that had always looked away before, and something in his expression changed. For the first time, Barrett Cole looked uncertain. You're making a mistake, he said, but the bluster had gone out of his voice. All of you, this town needs me. The mine needs me. Without me, Copper Creek is nothing. Maybe, Tom Brennan said, stepping forward. Or maybe we'll find out we never needed you as much as we thought. Maybe we'll discover that we can run this town just fine without a would-be emperor telling us what to do. You old fool, you'll... Careful, Eli said, his gun still in his hand, though pointed at the floor. You're not in a position to threaten anyone right now. Your enforcer is under arrest for child murder. Your hold on this town is broken, and if you're smart, you'll walk away while you still can. Cole's face went through several expressions: rage, calculation, fear. Finally, he turned and stormed out of the saloon, shoving through the crowd. But as he left, Eli heard him mutter, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Probably not, Eli thought. Men like Cole didn't give up power easily. But for now, for this moment, the town had won a victory. They moved Miller to the jail, the crowd following at a respectful distance. Doc Sawyer tended to his shoulder wound. The bullet had gone clean through, missing anything vital, while Dawson locked him in a cell. Miller sat on the narrow cot, his face a mask of hate and pain, staring at Eli through the bars. "You think you've won," Miller said. "You think you're a hero, but you're just a fool chasing ghosts." "Sarah Mitchell wasn't a ghost," Eli said quietly. "Neither were her children. They were real people with real lives, and you took that away from them. That's not a ghost. That's a debt that needs to be paid." "I didn't kill anybody." "Then you'll have your day in court to prove it. But we both know the truth." Eli turned to leave, then stopped. "The woman you killed, Sarah Mitchell, her last words were her children's names. She died calling for them, trying to protect them, even as you shot her. I want you to think about that while you sit in this cell. I want you to remember that she was brave and loving and good, and you were none of those things." He walked out of the jail into the bright morning sun. The crowd was still there, and now they were talking among themselves, their voices excited and hopeful. Grace pushed through to him, her face radiant. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it. You caught him." "We caught him," Eli corrected. "Dawson stood up when it mattered, and all these people," he gestured to the crowd, "they showed Cole that fear isn't absolute. That took more courage than anything I did." Dawson emerged from the jail, looking tired but more at peace than Eli had yet seen him. "I sent telegrams to the U.S. Marshal's office and to David Mitchell in Red River. Let them know we've got Miller in custody. The marshal should be here within the week." "What about Cole?" "What about him?" "He's lost his enforcer, lost his hold on the town. He's still got money and property, but the fear is broken. That was his real power, and it's gone now." Dawson paused. "Of course, he's not going to take this lying down. We'll need to post guards on the jail, make sure Miller stays safe until the marshals arrive." "I'll take the first watch," Eli said. "Tonight. You get some rest. You've earned it." The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their daily lives, but walking a little taller, talking a little louder. The weight of fear had lifted, if only partially, and the town seemed lighter for it. Grace walked with Eli back toward the hotel. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for the marshals to arrive. We keep Miller locked up. We stay alert in case Cole tries something desperate." Eli looked at her. "And you start thinking about what comes next. What you want to do with your life now that you're free of Cole's saloon." "I don't know," Grace admitted. "I've been drifting for so long, just surviving from one day to the next. I never thought about what I actually wanted." "You've got time to figure it out. And you've got people here who care about you, your uncle, the people in this town who've seen what you've survived." He paused. "You've got me too, if you want." Grace stopped walking and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What are you saying?" Eli realized he wasn't quite sure himself. He'd spent 3 years keeping everyone at arm's length, afraid to care too much, afraid to lose someone else the way he'd lost Emma. But Grace had gotten past his defenses somehow, and now he was saying things he hadn't planned to say. "I'm saying that when this is done, when Miller's been transferred and justice is served, I don't have to move on right away. I could stay in Copper Creek for a while, make sure the town stays free, help rebuild what Cole and his men broke." He met her eyes. "If that's something you'd want." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, that's something I'd want very much." They stood there in the street, the morning sun warm on their faces, and for the first time in 6 months, Eli felt something like hope stirring in his chest. The hunt wasn't over yet. Miller still had to face trial, justice still had to be fully served, but they'd cleared the first hurdle. And maybe, just maybe, there was room in Eli's future for something more than revenge and sorrow. The rest of the day passed in a kind of tentative celebration. People came by the jail to see Miller locked up, as if they needed visual proof that the nightmare was really over. Martha Henderson brought food. Sarah Chen brought clean blankets. Doc Sawyer brought medical supplies in case they were needed. It was like the whole town was exhaling a breath they'd been holding for years. As evening approached, Eli took up his position outside the jail, sitting in a chair with his gun across his lap, watching the street for trouble. Dawson had gone home to his wife and daughters, promising to return in the morning. The town settled into its nighttime rhythms, quieter than usual, as if everyone was afraid too much noise might break the spell. Around midnight, Tom Brennan appeared out of the darkness, moving surprisingly quietly for such an old man. "Thought you might want company," Tom said, settling into a chair beside Eli. "And maybe some of this." He produced a flask. "I don't drink when I'm on watch." "Suit yourself. More for me." Tom took a sip, then said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Grace, for what you're doing for all of us. This town, we'd forgotten what it felt like to have hope. You gave that back to us. I just did what needed doing." "Maybe so. But sometimes that's all it takes. One person doing what needs doing. Makes the rest of us remember we can do it too." Tom was quiet for a moment. "What'll you do after the marshals take Miller? Move on to the next town? The next hunt?" "I don't know yet," Eli admitted. "Part of me wants to keep hunting, keep tracking down killers and bringing them to justice. That's all I've known for 3 years. But another part of me—" He stopped, struggling with words. "Another part wonders if maybe it's time to stop running from my grief and start building something new. Grace is a good woman, smart, strong, brave. Any man would be lucky to have her. I know. But I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Not sure I deserve it." Tom chuckled softly. "Son, if we only got what we deserved, we'd all be in a heap of trouble. Grace doesn't care about what you deserve. She cares about who you are. And from where I'm sitting, you're the kind of man any uncle would be proud to see courting his niece." They sat in companionable silence after that, 2 men keeping watch over a prisoner who represented both justice and the possibility of change. The night deepened. Stars wheeled overhead. And in his cell, Frank Miller lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing that his past had finally caught him and that morning would bring him one day closer to the reckoning he'd spent 6 months running from. The next few days fell into a routine. Eli and Dawson alternated watches over the jail. The town went about its business, but there was a new energy in the air. People talked more freely, laughed more easily, moved without the constant weight of fear pressing down on them. Cole stayed in his office above the saloon, rarely seen, his influence waning with each day that passed. On the 3rd day, Henry Walsh came down from his claim with news. "Found something interesting," he told Eli and Dawson. "Was talking with some of the other prospectors, and one of them remembers Miller about 7 months back. Says Miller was bragging about a big score he'd just made, how he'd solved a problem for some people back in Texas and gotten paid well for it." "Did he say who hired him?" Eli asked. "No, but he did say Miller had a lot of cash, more than a drifter should have. And he was drinking expensive whiskey, buying rounds for everyone, acting like a man who'd just come into money." It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Miller hadn't just killed Sarah Mitchell and her children in a fit of rage. He'd been hired to do it. Hired by someone who wanted David Mitchell's land, someone who thought murder was an acceptable business practice. The realization made Eli's blood run cold. "We need to find out who hired him," Eli said. "If we can prove Miller was a hired killer, it strengthens the murder case and might lead us to other crimes." "I'll send some telegrams," Dawson said. "See if anyone in Red River knows who wanted the Mitchell property. But Carson, even if we find out who hired him, they might be beyond our reach. Rich men with murder on their hands usually know how to cover their tracks." "Maybe. But right now, let's focus on making sure Miller faces justice. The rest can come later." On the 5th day, as Eli was taking his evening watch, Grace came to sit with him. She brought coffee and fresh bread, and they ate together as the sun set in a blaze of color. "Uncle Tom says the town council's talking about offering you the sheriff's position," Grace said. "After Dawson retires, I mean. He says Dawson's planning to step down once the marshals take Miller, says he's too old for the job and that you'd be better suited." Eli was quiet, turning the idea over in his mind. Sheriff of Copper Creek. A permanent position, a place to belong, a reason to stop drifting. It was tempting in ways he hadn't expected. "What do you think?" he asked Grace. "Should I stay?" "That's not my decision to make." "I'm asking your opinion." Grace looked at him in the fading light. her bruises finally starting to fade, her eyes clear and steady. I think you've been running from your pain for 3 years. I think you've been punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. And I think maybe Copper Creek could be the place where you finally stop running and start healing. And what about you? What do you want? I want... She stopped, took a breath, started again. I want to build a life here. Uncle Tom said the town needs a schoolteacher, and I've got enough education to teach the children. I want to stay in Copper Creek and be part of something good, something that's growing instead of dying. And I want... She met his eyes. I want to see where this goes, between us. Eli reached out and took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. So do I. They sat together as night fell, two people who'd found each other in the middle of chaos and violence, two people who'd discovered that even in the darkest places, hope could take root and grow. On the 7th day, just after dawn, 2 U.S. Marshals rode into Copper Creek. They were hard-looking men, seasoned lawmen with the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Eli and Dawson met them at the jail, showed them the evidence, explained the case against Miller. We'll take him to Santa Fe for trial, the lead marshal said. His name was James Garrett, and he had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. David Mitchell has been notified. He'll be there to testify. With your statements and the other witnesses you've gathered, we should have a strong case. They brought Miller out in chains. The killer looked diminished somehow, smaller than he had seemed when he was free and dangerous. His shoulder had healed poorly, and he moved stiffly, his face twisted with pain and hate. As they loaded Miller onto a horse, he looked at Eli one last time. "This isn't justice," he spat. "This is revenge." "No," Eli said quietly. "Revenge would be me putting a bullet in you the way you put bullets in Sarah Mitchell's babies. Justice is you facing a jury, having your guilt proclaimed publicly, and hanging for your crimes. There's a difference." They watched the marshals ride out with their prisoner, the whole town gathering to see Miller leave. As the riders disappeared into the distance, a cheer went up, spontaneous and joyful, the sound of people celebrating their freedom. Dawson turned to Eli, a smile on his weathered face. "It's done. He'll hang for what he did, and Copper Creek is free of him. That's a good day's work." "It is," Eli agreed. But even as he spoke, he felt a strange emptiness. For 6 months, hunting Miller had given his life purpose and direction. Now that the hunt was over, he wasn't quite sure who he was supposed to be. Grace seemed to sense his thoughts. She took his arm and said, "Come on, Uncle Tom's organized a celebration at the hotel. The whole town's invited. You should be there. You're the guest of honor, after all." The celebration was modest by city standards, but felt like a festival to the people of Copper Creek. There was food and music, laughter and dancing. People came up to Eli all evening, shaking his hand, thanking him, asking him to stay. And slowly, as the night wore on, Eli felt the emptiness inside him begin to fill with something he'd almost forgotten, a sense of belonging, of community, of home. He danced with Grace as a fiddler played, her hand warm in his, her smile brighter than any lamp. And as they moved together to the music, Eli realized that maybe this was what justice really looked like. Not just punishment for the guilty, but healing for the survivors. Not just endings, but new beginnings. Later that night, as the celebration was winding down, Dawson pulled Eli aside. "I meant what I said about retiring. This town needs a real lawman, someone the people trust, someone who'll stand up to men like Barrett Cole. That's you, Carson. I'm formally offering you the position of sheriff of Copper Creek." Eli looked around the room, at Grace talking with her uncle, at Martha Henderson laughing with Doc Sawyer, at all these people who'd found their courage again. Then he looked at Dawson and nodded. "I accept. On one condition." "What's that?" "We do this right. No more corruption, no more looking the other way. We enforce the law fairly and equally, no matter who's involved. Can you live with that?" Dawson smiled. "Son, that's exactly why I want you to take this job. The badge will be yours tomorrow morning." As Eli walked Grace home through the quiet streets, she said, "You're really staying then, taking the job." "I'm really staying, if that's all right with you." It's more than all right." She stopped and turned to face him. "Eli Carson, I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. but I need to say this. You saved my life. More than that, you reminded me that I was worth saving, and I think—" She took a breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Eli felt his throat tighten with emotion. For 3 years, he'd thought his heart was dead, buried with Emma in that grave back in Texas. But standing here in the Arizona night, looking at Grace's hopeful face, he felt it stirring back to life. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," he said, "and that terrifies me more than any gunfight ever could." "Why?" "Because the last time I loved someone, I lost her. And I don't know if I could survive losing someone else." Grace reached up and touched his face gently. "You can't live your life afraid of loss. Emma wouldn't want that for you. She'd want you to be happy, to find love again, to build a life worth living. You know that's true." He did know it. Emma had been generous and loving, and she would have wanted him to move forward, not to spend the rest of his life trapped in grief and guilt. The realization brought tears to his eyes. "You're right," he whispered. "She would want me to be happy." "Then be happy," Grace said simply. "Starting now." And there, in the warm Arizona night, with the stars wheeling overhead and the sound of celebration still echoing from the hotel, Eli Carson finally began to let go of the past and reach for the future. The morning after the celebration, Eli stood in the sheriff's office with his hand on the Bible while Tom Brennan, acting as mayor, administered the oath. Grace watched from the doorway, her eyes bright with pride. Dawson stood beside them, the old star already unpinned from his chest, ready to pass it on to the man who would restore honor to it. "Do you, Eli Carson, solemnly swear to uphold the laws of this territory and the Constitution of the United States, to serve and protect the citizens of Copper Creek without fear or favor, so help you God?" Eli thought about all the oaths he'd taken in his life. The one when he'd become a marshal. The one when he'd married Emma. The silent oath he'd made over her grave. Each had changed him, shaped him into the man standing here now. This oath felt different somehow, more personal. This wasn't just about duty or revenge or grief. This was about building something instead of tearing things down. "I do," he said, his voice clear and strong. Dawson pinned the star to Eli's chest, his weathered hand steady. "It's yours now, son. Wear it with honor." The weight of the badge was lighter than Eli expected, but the weight of responsibility that came with it was heavier than any gun. He looked at the faces gathered in the small office: Tom, Grace, Martha Henderson, Doc Sawyer, Sarah Chen with David beside her, and saw hope reflected in their eyes. They were counting on him to keep them safe, to maintain the freedom they'd only just reclaimed. It was a burden, but one he found himself willing to carry. "Thank you for your trust," Eli said. "I won't let you down. But I need all of you to understand something. Being sheriff of this town means enforcing the law fairly for everyone. That includes Barrett Cole. If he's broken laws, if he's hurt people, there will be consequences. I won't be intimidated by his money or his influence." "We wouldn't expect anything less," Tom said. "That's exactly why we want you wearing that badge." After the ceremony, people drifted away to their daily business, leaving Eli alone in the office with Grace. She came and stood in front of him, reaching up to touch the star on his chest. "Sheriff Carson," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "It suits you." "I hope so. I've spent 3 years running from responsibility, from connection, from everything that might tie me down. Now here I am, about as tied down as a man can get." "Having second thoughts?" "No." He covered her hand with his. "No second thoughts, just hoping I'm up to the challenge. You faced down Frank Miller. You stood up to Barrett Cole. You tracked a killer across 3 territories and brought him to justice. I think you can handle being sheriff of a mining town." Eli laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "When you put it that way, it does sound manageable." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. A young man Eli recognized as Billy Watts, the teenager who'd backed down when Grace was being dragged through the street, stood there nervously. "Sheriff Carson, I was wondering if I could talk to you for a minute." "Come in, Billy. What can I do for you?" Billy twisted his hat in his hands, his face working with shame. "I wanted to apologize for not helping Miss Brennan that day when Miller and Cole were hurting her. I should have done something, should have stood up, but I was scared and—" "Billy." Eli's voice was gentle but firm. Fear is natural. You're 17 years old and you were facing down a man like Barrett Cole and his hired guns. No one expected you to be a hero. But you did it. You weren't afraid. I was terrified, Eli admitted. But I'd learned something over the years. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You'll have another chance to be brave, Billy. When that moment comes, I trust you'll make the right choice. Billy nodded, his young face serious. I will, sir. I promise. And I wanted to ask, are you looking for a deputy? I know I'm young, but I'm a good shot, and I'm willing to learn. I want to help make this town better. Eli considered it. He would need help, especially if Cole decided to cause trouble. And there was something to be said for giving a young man a chance to prove himself, to become the person he wanted to be. Tell you what, Eli said, come by tomorrow morning at dawn. I'll test your shooting, see how you handle yourself in a difficult situation. If you measure up, the job's yours. But Billy, this isn't about glory or excitement. It's about service, about protecting people, even when it's hard or dangerous or thankless. You understand that? Yes, sir. I understand. After Billy left, Grace said, You're going to take him on, aren't you? Probably. This town needs to know that it's their town, that they're responsible for keeping it safe. Billy's young, but he's local. He cares about Copper Creek. That counts for something. Grace kissed his cheek. You're a good man, Eli Carson. I'm glad you're staying. The first week as sheriff passed in a blur of activity. Eli spent his days learning the town, meeting with citizens, hearing their concerns. The copper mine was a constant source of problems. Safety violations, wage disputes, workers injured because coal cut corners to maximize profit. Eli documented everything carefully, building a case that would hold up if he ever got the chance to bring Cole to justice. Barrett Cole himself remained frustratingly elusive. He stayed in his office above the saloon, conducting business through intermediaries, never giving Eli a reason to confront him directly. But Eli could feel the man's presence like a weight, could sense that Cole was planning something. Men like Cole didn't give up power without a fight. Billy Watts proved himself capable during his test and was sworn in as deputy. The boy took to the work with an earnestness that reminded Eli of himself at that age, before the world had taught him how cruel it could be. Together, they patrolled the town, settled disputes, and slowly but surely established that the law in Copper Creek was real again. On the 8th day, Eli received a telegram from Marshal Garrett in Santa Fe. The message was brief but satisfying. Miller had confessed. Faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from David Mitchell himself, the killer had finally admitted to murdering Sarah Mitchell and her children. He'd been hired, just as Eli suspected, by a land speculator who wanted the Mitchell property. The trial would proceed, but the confession made conviction certain. Miller would hang. Eli read the telegram twice, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Justice for Sarah and her children, finally. An ending to the hunt that had consumed 6 months of his life, but also a strange sadness, a recognition that no amount of justice could bring them back, could undo the horror of what had happened to them. He was still holding the telegram when Grace found him sitting on the porch of the sheriff's office, staring out at the desert. "What is it?" she asked, seeing the expression on his face. He handed her the telegram. She read it, her face tightening with emotion. He confessed. "That's good, isn't it? That's what you wanted." "It is, and it isn't." Eli struggled to put his feelings into words. "I spent 6 months tracking Miller, thinking that if I could just bring him to justice, it would mean something. It would make Sarah's death less senseless. But now that it's done, now that he's confessed and will hang, I realize it doesn't bring her back. It doesn't undo the pain her husband feels. Doesn't give those children another chance at life. It's just done, finished, and I don't know what to do with that." Grace sat beside him, taking his hand. "Justice isn't about making things right, Eli. It's about making sure wrong actions have consequences. You did that. You made sure Miller faced those consequences. That matters, even if it doesn't heal all the wounds." "I know. It's just, I've been chasing this for so long, it became my whole identity. Eli Carson, the man hunting a killer. Now that the hunt's over, I have to figure out who I am without it. You're the sheriff of Copper Creek. You're the man who gave this town its courage back. She hesitated, then continued. You're the man I'm falling more in love with every day. Eli turned to look at her, really look at her, seeing past the bruises that had faded to nothing, past the fear that had defined her when they first met. Grace Brennan was strong and brave and beautiful, and somehow, against all odds, she saw something worth loving in a broken man who'd spent 3 years running from his pain. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Stop saying that. Stop deciding what you do or don't deserve. Just accept that I love you and that you have a chance to build something good here. Can you do that? Could he? Could he let go of the guilt and grief that had been his constant companions? Could he accept that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to be happy again? I can try, he said finally. That's all I can promise. That I'll try. That's enough. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. That's more than enough. The peace of that moment was shattered by Billy Watts running up the street, his face flushed with urgency. Sheriff, there's trouble at the mine. One of the tunnels collapsed. Men are trapped inside. Eli was on his feet instantly, his hand automatically checking his gun. How many men? They don't know. Maybe 6 or 7. Could be more. Get Doc Sawyer. Tell him to bring his medical kit and meet me at the mine. Then round up every able-bodied man you can find with a shovel. We're going to need all the help we can get. Billy took off running. Eli turned to Grace. Stay here. If this is bad, if men are dying in that mine, things could get ugly fast. Be careful, she said, fear evident in her voice. Always am. The mine was a scene of controlled chaos when Eli arrived. Workers were gathered at the entrance to one of the tunnels, shouting and gesturing. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. Eli pushed through the crowd and found the mine foreman, a grizzled man named Jack Peterson. What happened? Eli demanded. Support beam gave way in Tunnel 3. Whole section came down. We've got at least 8 men trapped in there, maybe more. We've been trying to dig through, but the rubble's unstable. Every time we pull a rock out, more comes down. Where's Cole? This is his mine. Where is he? Peterson's face twisted with anger. In town, I suppose, safe in his office while his men die in his mine because he was too cheap to replace those support beams like I told him we needed to. Eli felt cold rage building in his chest. This wasn't an accident. This was negligence, maybe even murder. Cole had cut corners, ignored safety warnings, and now men were paying the price. We need to stabilize the tunnel before we can dig them out, Eli said, forcing himself to focus on the immediate problem. Do we have more support beams? Some. But it'll take time to shore it up properly. Then we'll have to work fast. Those men don't have much air. Eli raised his voice, addressing the gathered workers. I need volunteers to go in with me. It's dangerous, and I won't order anyone to risk their lives. But those men in there, they're counting on us. Every hand went up. In that moment, Eli saw what Copper Creek really was. Not the corrupt, frightened place it had been when he arrived, but a community of good people who looked out for each other. It gave him hope, even in the midst of crisis. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, taking turns digging through the rubble, passing rocks back in a human chain, shoring up the unstable sections with whatever timber they could find. Doc Sawyer set up a makeshift field hospital outside the tunnel entrance, ready to treat the injured when they were brought out. It was slow, brutal work. Twice more, sections of the tunnel threatened to collapse, sending workers scrambling back to safety. But they kept at it, driven by the knowledge that men were trapped in the darkness, their air running out with every passing minute. Eli was deep in the tunnel, working beside Peterson and 3 other men, when they finally broke through to the trapped section. The air that rushed out was stale and thin, and for a horrible moment, Eli thought they were too late. Then he heard it, a weak cough, a groan of pain. They were alive. Get lights in here, Eli shouted, and get those support beams up before this whole section comes down. They worked with desperate speed, shoring up the tunnel even as they pulled men out one by one. Some were conscious, others barely breathing. All were covered in dust and blood, their faces masks of pain and fear. Doc Sawyer and his volunteers took each man as he emerged, triaging injuries, providing what treatment they could. The last man out was barely more than a boy, maybe 19 years old. He was unconscious, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Eli carried him personally, moving as fast as he dared through the unstable tunnel. Just as he reached the entrance, there was a deep rumbling behind him. The tunnel was collapsing. "Run!" someone shouted. Eli ran, the boy's weight heavy in his arms, the sound of falling rock growing louder behind him. He burst out of the tunnel entrance just as the section they'd been working in caved in completely, sending a cloud of dust billowing out after him. For a moment, everyone just stood there, stunned by how close they'd come to disaster. Then the relief hit, and suddenly people were cheering, slapping each other on the back, celebrating the fact that they were alive. Doc Sawyer took the unconscious boy from Eli's arms. "You did good, Sheriff. Real good. All 8 men accounted for, and while some are hurt badly, I think they'll all survive." Eli looked at the collapsed tunnel, at the men who'd risked their lives to save their fellow workers, at the community that had come together in crisis. Then he looked toward town, toward where Barrett Cole sat safe in his office, and the cold rage returned. "Doc, when you're done treating these men, I want you to document every injury, every broken bone, every cut, every bruise. And Peterson," he turned to the foreman, "I need you to write up a full report on the condition of this mine. Every safety violation, every corner that was cut, everything Cole did wrong. Can you do that?" Peterson's grin was fierce. "With pleasure, Sheriff. I've been keeping records for months, waiting for someone with the guts to do something about it." "Good, because Barrett Cole is going to answer for this. I'm done letting him hide behind his money and his lawyers." Billy Watts appeared at Eli's elbow, his young face smudged with dirt. "What do you need me to do, Sheriff?" "Go into town. Find Judge Morrison. He's honest, one of the few Cole doesn't own. Tell him I need warrants. Negligent endangerment for starters, maybe manslaughter depending on whether any of these men die from their injuries. Then find every lawyer in this territory who might be willing to take on a case against Barrett Cole." Billy's eyes widened. "You're really going after him? With the law?" "That's what the law is for, Billy, to hold powerful men accountable for their actions." Eli's voice was hard. "Miller murdered people with his hands and a gun. Cole murders people with his greed and negligence. Both deserve to face justice." As the night wore on, as the injured were treated and the community came together to support the mine workers and their families, Eli felt a shift happening. This wasn't just about Cole anymore. This was about showing Copper Creek that the law could work, that powerful men could be held accountable, that justice wasn't just for the rich and connected. He found Grace waiting for him outside the mine, her face tight with worry. When she saw him, covered in dust and grime but alive, she ran to him and threw her arms around him. "I heard about the tunnel collapse. I thought, when it came down—" "I'm all right. We got them all out." He held her tight, suddenly aware of how close he'd come to dying, how much he had to lose now. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She pulled back to look at him. "What?" "When I was in that tunnel, when I thought it might come down on top of me, all I could think about was you. About the life we could have together. About all the things I want to say to you but haven't found the courage to say yet." He took her face in his hands. "I love you, Grace Brennan. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you here in Copper Creek." Tears streamed down Grace's face, but she was smiling. "Yes. God, yes. I love you too, Eli. I think I've loved you since the moment you stepped between me and Barrett Cole, since the moment you showed me that someone cared enough to fight for me." They kissed there in the dusty darkness, surrounded by the sounds of people working together, of community healing itself. And for the first time since Emma's death, Eli felt truly alive, truly present in his own life instead of just going through the motions. The next morning, Eli marched into Barrett Cole's office with warrants in hand and Billy Watts at his side. Cole was sitting behind a massive desk, a cigar in one hand and a whiskey in the other, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Sheriff Carson," Cole's voice dripped with false pleasantness, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Eli slapped the warrants down on the desk. "Barrett Cole, you're under arrest for criminal negligence resulting in the injury of 8 workers in your mine. You're also being served with civil complaints from the families of those workers and from the town of Copper Creek itself for violations of territorial safety laws." Cole's face went red. "You can't arrest me. I own this town." "You used to own this town. Not anymore. Eli's voice was cold. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back or I'll drag you out of here in chains. Your choice." Cole stood, his body trembling with rage. "You have no idea what you're doing. I have lawyers. I have friends in high places. I'll have your badge. I'll have your life." "Maybe, but right now you're under arrest." Eli nodded to Billy, who stepped forward with handcuffs. "And every person in this town is watching to see what happens when a rich man finally faces consequences for his actions. So you can come peacefully and maintain some dignity, or you can resist and prove to everyone that you think you're above the law. What's it going to be?" For a long moment, Cole just stared at him, and Eli could see the calculation happening behind those eyes. Cole was weighing his options, considering whether he could talk or buy or threaten his way out of this. But then he looked past Eli to the window, where a crowd had gathered outside. The people of Copper Creek, watching to see if their new sheriff would really hold Barrett Cole accountable. Finally, Cole extended his hands. "I'll remember this, Carson. When I'm free, and I will be free, I'll remember what you did here today." "I'm counting on it," Eli replied. "Because when you're free, if you're free, I'll be watching, and if you step 1 inch out of line, I'll be there to put you right back in that cell." They walked Cole through the streets of Copper Creek in handcuffs, and the crowd that had gathered to watch broke into spontaneous applause. People cheered, children waved, women cried with relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the entire town, as if they could finally breathe freely after years of oppression. At the jail, they locked Cole in the same cell that had held Frank Miller. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "You're making a mistake," Cole said from behind the bars. "A huge mistake." "The only mistake was letting you terrorize this town for as long as you did," Eli replied. "But that ends now." The trial, when it finally happened 2 weeks later, was the biggest event Copper Creek had seen in years. Lawyers came from Santa Fe, witnesses testified, and the people of the town packed the makeshift courtroom to watch justice unfold. Peterson's documentation of safety violations was damning. Doc Sawyer's medical testimony about the injuries was brutal, and one by one, workers who'd been too afraid to speak up before found their voices and told their stories. In the end, the jury found Cole guilty of criminal negligence. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in territorial prison and ordered him to pay restitution to every worker he'd injured, every family he'd harmed. His property was seized to pay the judgments, including the mine itself, which was placed under the control of a workers' cooperative. As they led Cole away to begin his sentence, he looked at Eli one last time. "This isn't over, Carson." "For you it is," Eli replied. "Your reign of terror is done. Copper Creek is free." And it was true. In the weeks that followed, the town transformed. The mine, under new management, implemented proper safety measures. Wages improved. The fear that had paralyzed the community for so long evaporated like morning mist. People walked taller, spoke louder, lived fuller lives. Grace started teaching at the newly established school, and Eli would sometimes watch her through the window, surrounded by children, her face radiant with purpose. She'd found her place, her calling, and seeing her happy made his own happiness complete. One evening, as they were walking home from dinner at Tom Brennan's house, Grace said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About us. About our future." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I know we've only known each other for a few months, but Eli, I can't imagine my life without you now. You've become essential to me in ways I didn't think were possible." Eli felt his heart start to pound. He'd been thinking the same thing, had been carrying something in his pocket for the past week, waiting for the right moment. Maybe this was it. "Grace, He stopped, took a breath, started again. "When Emma died, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel anything but grief and guilt again. But you showed me that it's possible to heal, to move forward, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small diamond, nothing fancy but honest and real. He dropped to one knee right there in the dusty street, and Grace's hands flew to her mouth. "Grace Brennan, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, trying to build a home and a family, and a life that honors everything we've survived to get here?" Grace was crying, but she was nodding even before the tears started falling. Yes, yes, Eli Carson, I'll marry you. I'll marry you and build that life with you and love you until my last breath. He slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. They kissed there in the street while the Arizona sun set in a blaze of glory behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and hope. And somewhere, Eli liked to think, Emma was watching and smiling, glad that he'd finally found his way back to life, back to love, back to himself. The weeks following the proposal passed in a blur of activity and joy that Eli had never expected to feel again. Grace wore her ring with pride, and the whole town seemed to share in their happiness. Martha Henderson insisted on organizing the wedding, enlisting half the women in Copper Creek to help with preparations. Tom Brennan walked around with a permanent smile, proud that his niece had found such a good man. Even Doc Sawyer got involved, offering his house for the reception since it was the largest in town. But amid the happiness, Eli remained vigilant. He'd learned long ago that peace was fragile, especially in a place that had only recently broken free from tyranny. Barrett Cole was in prison, but his influence hadn't completely disappeared. There were still men in town who'd benefited from Cole's corruption, still people who resented the changes Eli had brought. One morning, about 3 weeks after the engagement, Billy Watts burst into the sheriff's office with urgent news. "Sheriff, we've got trouble, real trouble." Eli looked up from the paperwork he'd been filing. "What kind of trouble?" "There's a man at the saloon asking questions about you, about what happened with Cole and Miller. He's been buying drinks, getting people to talk. And Sheriff," Billy's face was pale, "he's wearing a gun like he knows how to use it." Eli felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd been expecting something like this, had known that arresting Cole would have consequences. Men like Cole had connections, had people who owed them favors. It was only a matter of time before someone came looking for revenge. "What does he look like?" "Tall, maybe 40 years old, scar on his left cheek, moves like a fighter. He's been in town for 2 days, just watching and listening, but this morning he started asking direct questions about you." Eli stood and checked his gun, a habit that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations. "Stay here. If I'm not back in an hour, find Grace and Tom. Get them somewhere safe." "Sheriff, you shouldn't go alone. Let me come with you." "No. If this is what I think it is, I need to handle it myself. You're a good deputy, Billy, but you're not ready for what might happen in that saloon." Billy looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Be careful, Sheriff." Eli walked through the morning heat toward the saloon, his mind racing through possibilities. Cole could have sent someone to kill him, to intimidate him into dropping the charges, or simply to send a message to anyone else who might stand up to powerful men. Whatever the reason, Eli knew this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he'd put those handcuffs on Barrett Cole. The saloon was quiet when he entered, just a few early drinkers nursing their whiskey. The stranger was easy to spot, sitting at a table in the corner, watching the door with the patient focus of a predator. When Eli walked in, the man's eyes locked onto him immediately. "Sheriff Carson," the stranger said, his voice smooth and cultured, at odds with his rough appearance. "I was hoping you'd come. Saves me the trouble of finding you." Eli stopped about 10 feet away, his hand resting casually near his gun. "You've been asking about me. Now you've found me. State your business." The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is James Holloway. Does that name mean anything to you?" The world seemed to tilt slightly. Holloway. Jack Holloway had been the man who killed Emma, the man who'd escaped to Mexico and lived free while Eli's wife lay dead. This had to be a relative, a brother, maybe, or a cousin. "Jack Holloway murdered my wife," Eli said quietly. "If you're here because of him, if you're here looking for revenge—" "Revenge?" James Holloway laughed, but the sound was bitter. "No, Sheriff. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to thank you." That caught Eli off guard. "Thank me?" "My brother Jack was a monster, a murderer, a thief, a man without conscience or soul. He destroyed our family's name, brought shame to everyone who bore the Holloway name." James took a drink of his whiskey, his hand steady. "When I heard what he'd done to your wife, I tried to find him myself, to bring him to justice or kill him. I wasn't particular which. but he'd gone to Mexico beyond my reach. He's still there, Eli said, beyond anyone's reach. No, he's not. James met Eli's eyes. He died 3 months ago, drank himself to death in some cantina south of the border. I got word last week, and I've been traveling ever since, trying to find the people Jack hurt, trying to make what amends I can. Eli felt something crack inside his chest. Jack Holloway was dead. The man who'd killed Emma, who'd stolen her life and destroyed Eli's world, he was gone. And Eli had never even known, had carried his hatred and grief for 3 years without knowing that the object of his vengeance was already in the ground. I'm sorry, James continued, for what my brother did to you, to your wife. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring her back. But I wanted you to know that not all Holloways are like Jack. Some of us still believe in honor, in doing what's right. Eli sat down heavily in the nearest chair, suddenly feeling the weight of 3 years pressing down on him. Why are you really here? If not for revenge, then what? James reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Jack had some money when he died. Not much, but something. I've been distributing it to his victims. What little restitution I can offer. This is your share. It's not nearly enough, but it's all there is. I don't want his money. Then give it to the church, or to the school, or to whatever charity you choose. But take it, Sheriff. Let it do some good in the world instead of rotting in a bank somewhere. James pushed the envelope across the table. And I wanted to tell you something else. Jack talked about you before he died, about how you'd ruined his life by arresting him, by testifying against him. He blamed you for everything that went wrong for him afterward. He killed my wife because I did my job, Eli said, his voice hard. I know, and he was wrong. Wrong to kill her, wrong to blame you, wrong about everything. But in his twisted mind, you were the villain of his story. James leaned forward. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Men like Jack, men like this Barrett Cole I've been hearing about, they never accept responsibility for their own actions. They always find someone else to blame. And that means the people who stand up to them, people like you, will always have targets on their backs. I know that. I accepted that risk when I pinned on this badge. I'm sure you did. But does your fiancée know? Does she understand that marrying you means living with that danger? The question hit home harder than Eli wanted to admit. He'd been so focused on his own feelings, on his own journey from grief to healing, that he hadn't fully considered what he was asking of Grace. She'd already been hurt because of her association with him, had already faced violence and fear. Was it fair to ask her to spend her life with that shadow hanging over them? Grace is stronger than you think, Eli said finally. She knows who I am and what I do. She's chosen me anyway. Then she's either very brave or very foolish, possibly both. James stood. I've said what I came to say, Sheriff. I hope you have a good life here in Copper Creek. I hope you find peace, find happiness, find everything my brother tried to steal from you. And if you ever need help, if the past comes calling in ways you can't handle alone, he pulled out a card and set it on the table. That's where you can find me. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay, but I'll try if you ever need it. After James Holloway left, Eli sat alone in the saloon for a long time, staring at the envelope and the card, thinking about destiny and choice and the ways the past never quite let go of you. Jack Holloway was dead. Had been dead for months while Eli went on living, went on hunting other killers, went on trying to find meaning in loss. Should he feel relief? Satisfaction? He wasn't sure what he felt, only that something had shifted, some weight had finally lifted. He was still sitting there when Grace found him an hour later. Billy must have told her where he'd gone, must have worried when Eli didn't return quickly. She slid into the chair across from him, her eyes searching his face. Billy said there was trouble. Are you all right? I'm fine. No trouble, just... He pushed the envelope toward her. Jack Holloway is dead. The man who killed Emma. He died 3 months ago, and I never knew. Grace picked up the envelope, understanding dawning on her face. His brother came to tell you? And to apologize. And to give me this blood money that I don't want but probably shouldn't refuse. Eli met her eyes. Grace, I need to ask you something. Really ask you, not just assume you understand. Are you sure you want to marry me? To tie your life to mine, knowing that there will always be men looking for revenge, always be danger. Grace was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. When you saved me that day in the street, when you stepped between me and Barrett Cole, I thought you were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I still haven't decided which. But what I do know is this. You're a good man, Eli Carson. You stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. That's rare. That's precious. And yes, it comes with risks. Yes, there will probably be more James Holloways, more angry brothers or vengeful friends, but there will also be more people saved, more towns freed, more lives made better because you were there. She reached across the table and took his hand. I'm not marrying you despite the danger. I'm marrying you knowing full well what comes with it. Because the alternative, living a safe, comfortable life without you, that's not living at all. That's just existing. And I'm done just existing. Eli felt tears prick his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. I love you. God, Grace, I love you so much it scares me. Good. It should scare you. Love is terrifying. It's vulnerability and risk and the possibility of loss. But it's also joy and connection and the thing that makes life worth living. She squeezed his hand. So yes, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. They sat together in the quiet saloon, holding hands across a table marked with the scars of 100 spilled drinks and 1,000 conversations, and Eli felt the last piece of his broken heart slot back into place. He would never forget Emma, would never stop missing her, but he could honor her memory by living fully, by loving again, by choosing hope over despair. The wedding was set for a Saturday in early October, when the brutal Arizona heat had finally broken and the evenings carried a hint of autumn coolness. The ceremony would be held in the church Tom Brennan had helped build 20 years earlier, with Doc Sawyer officiating since Copper Creek didn't have a permanent preacher. The whole town was invited, and it seemed like the whole town was coming. In the days leading up to the wedding, Eli found himself taking stock of his life in a way he hadn't done since Emma's death. He'd come to Copper Creek tracking a killer, expecting to move on once justice was served. Instead, he'd found a home, a community, a purpose beyond revenge. He'd found Grace, who'd reminded him that healing was possible, that the future didn't have to be defined by the past. The night before the wedding, Tom Brennan knocked on the door of the sheriff's office, where Eli was finishing up some paperwork. "Got a minute for an old man?" Tom asked. "For you?" "Always." Tom sat down across from Eli's desk, looking more serious than usual. "I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow, man to man, uncle to future nephew." "All right." "Grace is the closest thing I have to a daughter. When she came to Copper Creek 3 months ago, she was broken, scared and hurt, and convinced the world was a cruel place that would never be kind to her. Then you showed up, and everything changed. You gave her hope, gave her strength, reminded her that she was worth fighting for." Tom's voice thickened with emotion. "You saved her life, Carson. Not just that day in the street, but in all the days since. You showed her what love looks like, what courage looks like, what it means to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." "She saved me too," Eli said quietly. "Maybe more than I saved her." "I know. I can see it in how you look at her, how you've changed since you met her. You came here chasing death, and you found life instead." Tom leaned forward. "But here's what I need to say to you. Grace has been hurt before. She's been let down by men who promised to protect her and then didn't. So when you make those vows tomorrow, when you promise to love and honor and cherish her, you damn well better mean it. Because if you ever hurt her, if you ever make her feel the way she felt when Barrett Cole was dragging her through the street, sheriff's badge or not, I will come after you. Understand?" Eli met the old man's eyes and saw the fierce protectiveness there, the love of a surrogate father for his girl. "I understand, and I give you my word. I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her. I'll protect her, support her, love her with everything I have. She's my second chance, Tom. I won't waste it." Tom studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That's all I needed to hear." His expression softened. "Welcome to the family, son. I'm proud to call you nephew." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Eli stood at the front of the church in a new suit that Martha Henderson had somehow procured, his hands sweating despite the cool morning air. Billy Watts stood beside him as best man, looking proud and nervous in equal measure. The church was packed with people, miners and shopkeepers, farmers and craftsmen, all the folks of Copper Creek who'd reclaimed their town and wanted to celebrate this union. Then the doors opened and Grace appeared on Tom Brennan's arm. She was beautiful in a simple white dress that caught the light streaming through the church windows. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing the face that had haunted Eli's dreams since the day he met her. But it was her eyes that captured him, bright and happy and full of love, all the fear and pain erased, replaced by joy and hope and certainty. As Tom walked Grace down the aisle, Eli found himself remembering another wedding, another bride in white. Emma had been beautiful too, had looked at him with that same love and trust. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm him, threatened to pull him back into the past. But then Grace smiled at him, her face radiant, and Eli understood something he'd been struggling with for 3 years. Honoring the past didn't mean being trapped by it. He could love Emma's memory and love Grace's present. He could carry what was with him while still reaching for what could be. Tom placed Grace's hand in Eli's and stepped back. Doc Sawyer opened his Bible and began to speak, his voice carrying through the church. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Eli Carson and Grace Brennan in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Eli, Grace, you have chosen to stand before this community and before God to pledge your lives to one another. That choice, that commitment, is the foundation upon which your marriage will be built. Doc Sawyer looked at Eli. Eli Carson, do you take Grace Brennan to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, for as long as you both shall live? Eli looked into Grace's eyes and saw his future there, not a future defined by loss and revenge, but one built on love and hope and the courage to be vulnerable again. I do. And Grace Brennan, do you take Eli Carson to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, for as long as you both shall live? Grace's voice was clear and strong. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Eli, you may kiss your bride. Eli pulled Grace close and kissed her as the church erupted in applause and cheers. In that moment, surrounded by people who'd become family, bound to a woman who'd become his whole world, Eli Carson finally felt at peace.